you will be ready to take on any stressor in the world.
If you're not breathing correctly, you're never, ever going to be healthy.
We have to actually start to hack things, and breathing is one of those hacks.
Some things that scientists thought were absolutely impossible have been proven to be absolutely possible by focusing on your breathing.
People who are doing mindfulness for years, 4 hours a day, cannot get as deep as we do when we get into this breathing technique inside of our brain. So people doing 4 hours of mindfulness for years have been compared inside brain scans to the brain scans being taken, people doing these breathing exercises. These breathing exercises, they bring you right into the depth of the mind. And that is only the logic, because breathing is the life force. And you are able to stop it, to manipulate it, to slow it, to accelerate, and thus you change the biochemistry. Not only, also the neural activity you are able to control and to enter into the deepest of yourself, because you are the light, you are neurology, you are the nervous system. It's all there. And it's very simple. Within 7 minutes, we go deeper than somebody who is doing 4 hours of mindfulness for years. So follow the breath. The breath is amazing. This is the way to enter into the brain, to activate 100% of the neural activity and to change for the good the pH levels in the blood, which is going into the brain. So the biochemistry of the brain, you are able to alter, and then you are able consciously to enter into any part of your brain, because the neural activity needs the right biochemistry. And then the will is able to enter into any part of the brain. And that is only logical. And this is the new paradigm. This is what we want to show to the people. Hey man, you are the owner of your brain and the owner of your own emotions. So be responsible, be a happy person, jolly good. He's a jolly good fellow, he's a jolly good. Yeah, let's be jolly every day. And so that's my answer.
No, I love it. So the breathing technique that I have done of yours in that auditorium, but also I did a couple of rounds this morning, was that sort of 30 or 40, breaths in, let out the breath, and then hold. That's a specific type of technique, right? Where you are blowing off carbon dioxide, which is the driver for us to breathe. And so, we're able to hold our breath. That's quite stimulating, right? So I did it this morning before breakfast. Actually, I actually was drinking my coffee and actually reading your book, and you were talking about it. I thought I should actually do this. I've not done it for a little while. So I went into the garden actually, because I thought, it was a nice morning here in the UK. The birds are singing. I thought, let me do it here. And I did 2 rounds. And I felt really energized afterwards. It's almost like having a caffeinated drink or a cold shower. Is this the kind of thing that you would recommend people do in the daytime, in the morning, but not before bed, because it sort of gets you amped up? Or can this be used before bed as well?
Oh, yes. That can be done, yes. Because it resets the endocrine system.
Right.
So, and what do you want when the endocrine system is there? You want to get rid of the cortisol, of the existent cortisol, remnants of it in the bloodstream, which is impeding the melatonin to set in. So what you do at that moment is spike the adrenal axis. This is what we do with this breathing exercise. And then everything gets in order. Everything is a reset. Because what happens when you are in a dangerous situation, you need to be at full functionality. That is nature. So what nature does through these breathing exercises bring you to full functionality, and your body knows it needs sleep. and and then the melatonin is able to uninhibited do its work, and you go to sleep, or you take even a cold shower. It's also to spike the adrenal axis a moment. It goes very fast down, and with that the cortisol goes down. It resets it all. So the recommendation is for the best is to do it on empty stomach in the morning. But if you are really stressed out in the evening because of this and that, take the cold shower or do the breathing, because it will pacify your hormonal system. Absolutely.
And just so we don't mislead anybody, these hyperventilation breathing techniques should not be done before going in the pool or the sea.
Not in just on a sofa or in bed.
Yeah.
If you want to learn to hold your breath and go under the water, do free diving. Yeah. Free diving courses, apnea courses, and all that. This is a strong medicine. We are talking a strong medicine.
Yeah.
And we are learning how to deal with the biochemistry through certain kinds of breathing exercises, and don't mess with it under the water, because then you get a different component to it. And you are yet not in control of the breathing exercises, what they do within the body. So don't do them in a swimming pool or outside. First, get to know what this is all about on a sofa or in bed.
Yeah. And when you get good at this, are we saying that it's not about getting good, right? It's about the practice. It's about seeing where that leads you. But once you start a regular practice of exposing yourself to cold every day, of doing some of this breath work every day, do you find then away from that, let's say you were swimming that afternoon, right? You're hours away from the breath holds that you did in the morning. Those techniques are building up your resilience so you're better able to face the cold.
Absolutely.
Or is it that you want to get to the stage where, let's say you want to be in an ice bath for 10 minutes. Is the goal at some point in company to do it just before you get in? Or is that, it's not about, it's about, are these separate things, or can they become together?
What I say with people who are into endurance sports and or fighting matches or anything that is stressful and where they have to be at full functionality, I say breathe before. Do the breathing, because it brings your pH level to the right level, 7.4, say, which is the residue, the biochemical residue, which we normally have, will upplay itself when you exert your body and or your mind. It will come from the lymphatic system, which was considered to be a closed system. We cannot enter because of the lymphatic knots. And now we are able, through these breathing techniques, to cleanse this storage of slightly acidic presence within us caused by, could be oxidative stress, inflammation, whatever. It is the wrong biochemistry which you do not need at the moment when you are into performance. So for those people who are going into performance, or even just being alive and cleansed, I say, do the breathing, because then you enter into the lymphatic system past the lymphatic knots. And this has been shown to get into the lymphatic system and cleanse whatever is acidic, bring it to the right pH level, which then when the performance is on, shows itself to be there is no resistance, there is no soreness, there's no acidity. Hey, I can keep on going. How come? Yeah, that's what we do. We cleanse the body before we go into performance. And then your performance will be always better.
So if I was to run a marathon, you would recommend how many rounds before you go and do that event? How many rounds of breath hold? 4 rounds.
4 rounds, 5 rounds. And then remember, when you run, always breathe more than you feel you need. Because through our conditioning, we have a more or less shallow breathing, shallow conditioned breathing patterns. And that is okay when we live normal, our lives covered up, destimulative behavior. It's all right. But when you exert your body, then suddenly you have more oxygen flow from the depth needed. So into the lymphatic, into the mitochondria, into the cells, into the deep tissue, you want to bring more oxygen. So what I say to the people who are doing endurance sports and haven't got that condition, I say, hey, breathe more than you feel you need. Just be more conscious about that breathing. Then you will see after 30 kilometers, when normally there is a breakdown, it's going down because the deep tissue is becoming very acidic and the biochemistry cannot be influenced anymore. Suddenly you feel much lighter and you are able to keep on going. Why? Because during your exercise, during the exertion, you were bringing in more oxygen yet than you feel you needed, past your conditioning. And that's what you need.
I want to be respectful of your time, Ben. There's, I'd love to keep chatting, but I don't know how long you've got. For people who are listening, I wonder if you have time to take me through a round of the breathing. And see, just so people can see it and they can feel it, and then download your app, get your book, and actually learn how to do it.
Okay, and everybody seated, being there, listening. All right, relax. A relaxed body is able to store up oxygen. When you're tensed, you're not. So make sure you are relaxed. Okay, here we are. We have a belly, we have a chest, and they are all connected to the lungs. That's why I want you to move your belly when you inhale, and then your chest fully, and then you let go. So fully in, letting go. Fully in, letting go. Fully in. Letting go. Be with your mind, just with the breath. Fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Take them on. Fully in. Letting go. No holding back. Let's go. Fully in. Letting go. Fully in. You become lightheaded, looming the body, all right. Tingling, all is okay. Fully in, letting go. Fully in. Letting go. Keep on going. Fully in. Don't mind. Just go. Fully in, letting go. And fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Letting go. The life force coming in. Oxygenizing all cells in the depth. Past the lymphatic knots. We are going in. Fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Go. 10 more. Fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Letting go. And fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Letting go. Fully. Letting go. Intensify. Anything that is different, intensify. Let's go past the conditioning. Fully in. Letting go. 3 more. Fully in. Letting go. Fully in. Letting go. Fully. Letting go. Here comes the last one. Fully in. And let it go. And stop after the exhalation. Relax. Witness. Be. All being, just be. We have blown off the carbon dioxide. We have changed the biochemistry within the blood. There is nothing going on for the wrong. The biochemistry is very pH high, very alkaline. And the body is able to do what the body is able to do. You are the alchemist. You have changed the biochemistry to the top. What now happens is that the saturation of oxygen is going down while you are still alkaline. This triggers the brainstem while being sort of high. You feel high, yet your body is in deep, deep stress right now. And thus the brainstem is at work, the fight and flight. Fully in. Yeah, okay, take them fully in. And hold. And squeeze it to your head is bringing cerebrospinal fluid to the brainstem. 3, 2, 1, and let it go. And you can let it go, Rangan. Good. This is to show the people, everybody, how to become the alchemist, how to get into the fight and flight mechanisms, the stress mechanisms. We have been in deep stress. You were longer than a minute without air in the lungs. Well, you've been quite sort of high. So you didn't experience stress, yet your stress mechanisms were really activated. And thus, because you are doing this consciously, you activate neurological pathways to the stress mechanisms in the brain. Wow. And whenever you need it out there, when stress is coming to you, you are like observing like you did right now in your breath. And this is the mirror, like the cold is the mirror. Take them on, guys, because you will be ready to take on any stressor in the world coming to you. Future is yours. Your happiness, strength, and health. That is who you are. Happy lives.
Thank you for taking me through that. And what was, I didn't know that was over a minute. But then when I took that in breath afterwards and held, it really felt like I was accessing a different state of sort of calm. And that was very different when I held on the inhale afterwards. That felt incredible. It really did.
Amazing. Life is amazing. Let's take part of the amazingness of life every day.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, this on the surface sounds like, oh, this is breath work, or this is cold exposure. But actually, the more I hear you speak, the more I read your book, the more it sort of comes over me that it's not really about breath work, or it's not really about cold exposure. It's about finding yourself. It's about really trying to dissolve the ego and actually figuring out who you are. So I think it is incredibly spiritual at its core.
Wow, that is a great resume. Thank you very much. And it's a great message. Everybody has so much more coming. That is the future paradigm. Let's embrace happiness, strength, and health, all of us. Because it is so bloody interesting to enter in the full potential of your own mind and the beauty of the soul. It's awaiting.
We take in 30 pounds of air into our lungs and out of our lungs every single day. So if you think that air and how we take that air in and how we expel it doesn't affect us, it's crazy. So much more than food. And in my opinion, after talking to researchers for so many years, you can eat all the right foods. You can eat paleo or keto or vegan or whatever. You can exercise as much as you want. But if you're not breathing correctly, you're never, ever going to be healthy. And I've seen this repeatedly with people who look to be the most fit people on the planet, and they have chronic respiratory problems. And they suffer from that in numerous ways. So once we take control of this unconscious ability to breathe, we can then harness all of the power within that and use it to do some incredible things. Some things that scientists thought were absolutely impossible have been proven to be absolutely possible by focusing on your breathing.
Yeah, well, we're going to delve into that during this conversation today, because there are so many fascinating stories that you've written about, research, case studies, really quite incredible. And there's a, you've done so many interviews since this book came out, and it is great for me as a medical doctor to see that there appears to be a huge amount of interest now, with books like yours really raising awareness of how important the way we breathe is. But I was really struck by your subtitle in the book. And so the book's called Breath, but then the subtitle is The New Science of a Lost Art. Now, not only does that sound amazing, there's a real magic there. The new science of a lost art. Science and art fascinates me because I say the practice of medicine is art and science. It's not just science. It's not just looking at publications. It's how do you put that all together with the person in front of you, the patient in front of you, and how do you sort of blend it together to come up with the right solution for the right patient? So tell me about that subtitle in the context of the breath. Why is it a lost art?
Well, what I kept finding as I researched breathing, the art of breathing, starting from the last century to the century before that, and going back thousands of years, is people have been talking about this and writing about this and studying this for millennia. So the earliest dated conscious breathing practices date back, about 3,000, 4,000 years. And if you look around the world, all of these different cultures started studying the same things. They've started coming to the same conclusions about breathing, that if we do it improperly, our health is going to suffer. If we do it properly, we can really help use that to help heal ourselves and to go up that next rung of human potential. So the thing that was frustrating is we would discover these things, and then for some reason, in some way, they would be ignored and lost. Then they would be rediscovered, renamed something else, rediscovered by someone else at a different time, and then be proven at that time and forgotten about. And this just kept happening over and over and over. I guess the more accurate title would be Lost and Found, because that's what kept happening. And it really feels like right now we're at this moment where we have the instruments, we have the interest to really study breathing and to prove how it's working, how it alters our minds and our bodies, and how it can benefit us. And that would be the new science of that subtitle. It's a new science, new measurements, looking at a very old practice.
Yeah, it's interesting when you compare this to other old practices, such as, let's say, traditional Chinese medicine, which for years has been telling us that different organs in the body function in different ways at different times of the day. Something that Western medicine until recently has almost sort of looked down upon. That was, the liver is the liver, the kidney is the kidney, but there's a lot of science now in circadian biology showing that these organs at different times in the day, there's different amounts of genetic expression, and they have different functions, different enzymatic functioning and all kinds of things. Yet we need we've needed modern science now to go, oh, actually, yeah, you were right. And I sort of understand that. And you are a science journalist, so I guess you may, or is it fair to say you always approach topics with a bit of skepticism? Because I kind of feel that is there not a little bit of arrogance in us as modern humans that we sort of feel that, oh, prove it, prove it. Like you're saying this has been written about 5,000 years ago. So it's so striking that we've forgotten it. We need reminding of it. But then also, why is it at this moment in time, in 2020, why does it appear to be such an interest now in breathing and breathwork? Because yes, your book is incredible, but Wim Hof has been gaining notoriety and popularity for a good few years now. Hopefully Patrick McEwen, and with the oxygen advantage, that's getting more and more awareness. I mean, what is going on? Why are people interested now?
I think the main thing for me was I had no slant going into this story. There's no benefit for me to say nasal breathing is better than mouth breathing, or one version of breathing is better than the other. So my job as a journalist is to go in, talk to the experts in the field, accumulate as much information, and objectively come out and give my assessment of this world of breathing. So there was a lot of what I found which was not supported at all, but the areas that I focused on the book have such a firm foundation of science. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way that science is set up, especially medical science right now. You know, at the beginning, about half of the professors and doctors and other experts I talked to said, breathing doesn't matter. So how we do it does not matter. Nose, mouth, 20 times a day, 10 times a day, your body is going to compensate, which is 100% true. Our bodies will compensate, but that doesn't mean they're fully working at their best potential. That doesn't mean we're healthy. Just getting by is different than being healthy. Then you have all these other researchers who have studied breathing for 50 years. Some of these researchers studied it for 50 years. They said, how we breathe absolutely affects us. It even affects the density of our bones. It affects us down to the atomic level, subatomic level with electrons. So to think that how we breathe does not matter is not based in any real science. And again, my job was to go in and talk to these people and look at the studies and piece together a story from that.
Yeah. Now, thanks for sharing that. When I think about breathing and when I talk to people, whether it's my family, my friends, patients, I think people are starting to get awareness now that actually it's important. But there's a bit of confusion. There's so many different breathing methods out there. And I think some people struggle to know, well, what sort of breathing method should I do? I really want to sort of delve into that today in this conversation. But I guess before we do that, is it worth clarifying, what is the problem at the moment? Is there a base level breathing practice that everyone should do, for example? Because I think it'll be easy, and I want to go into all different kinds of breathing practices, but I also want to make sure we don't lose people so that they can see the big picture, but they also know a simple thing that they can take away and start applying.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's a question I had early on because you've got dozens of books on breathing. There's some books on pranayama that have 300 different practices in it. It's like, where do I begin here? What I found is so many of them all come to the same conclusion. They're all doing the same thing. So they're means to the same ends. So if you look at ancient Chinese practices of breathing, they are almost identical to ancient Hindu practices of breathing, which are almost identical to the yoga practices that are being used now, or the other practices that are being used by psychiatrists for anxiety and depression. They're all doing the same thing. We know this from measurements. So what I tried to do in the book was not to focus on these individual breathing techniques, but to focus on the larger story around it. How do they affect us? What are they? Where did they come from? Because it doesn't matter. You could call it by 12 different names. Slow breathing is slow breathing. And there's a very simple way of doing it. So the center of the book is a foundation of breathing that everybody can benefit from. And again, it doesn't matter who invented this or who claims to have invented this stuff or at what time. It's simple practices of breathing through the nose, exhaling more, breathing less, breathing slowly. So that's what I tried to focus on, the general view of this. And if you want more of the specifics, there's already a zillion books on the how-to with hundreds of different practices.
You're just past 8 a.m. at the moment in San Francisco. So I don't know what your normal wake-up time is, but have you done any breath work this morning as a way of preparing for the day ahead?
I'm a night owl, so my normal wake-up time is much later than this, hence the tea over here.
Oh, wow.
But, people think that since I studied breathing for so many years, I'd be the best breather in the world, and I'm not. I've got a lot of work to do. But at least the first step about breathing is to be conscious of it and to understand that this isn't something that should just be running in the background, in the back of our minds, but something that we can take control of. So I'm acutely aware of when I'm breathing improperly. and I'm acutely aware of then how to fix it. So more intense breath work practices I will do about 3 or 4 times a week, usually at night. But throughout the day, I'm adopting very simple, healthy breathing habits. And that to me is one of the most important things about this. This isn't asking people to go out and run 6 miles a day or to completely change their lifestyle. You can adopt healthy breathing habits no matter what you're doing. If you're sitting in front of a computer, if you're watching Netflix, if you're walking around. And just by adopting those, you can have a transformative effect on your health. That sounds like a huge claim, but I've seen it and the studies have shown it.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's a great message for people. So let's dive into something that you have written about. You've touched on it in the conversation so far, nasal breathing, okay? And, you know, for people who've been listening to my podcast for a while, they will have heard me talk about this with Brian MacKenzie and with Patrick McKeown, right? But I think we've got a lot of new listeners, and I think it's always reiterating how important it is to breathe through your nose. So what's going on? When someone breathes through their nose compared to their mouth, what is going on and why does it make such a difference?
So when we breathe through our nose, we are humidifying air, we're pressurizing air, we are filtering that air out, and we're conditioning it so that by the time that air gets to our lungs, it can more easily be absorbed and we can extract oxygen from it. So we know this. This has been proven time and time again. And yet about 25 to 50% of the population habitually mouth breathes. And when you mouth breathe, you get none of those benefits. You can almost think of the lungs as an external organ when you're mouth breathing, right? They're exposed to everything in your environment. And if you live in a city like I do, I don't want to expose my lungs to all those allergens and pollutants. So the quickest way of filtering air and conditioning it is this wondrous organ right in the front of our faces called the nose. And it is completely underappreciated and underused in society.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you go from, I think I've read you say before, or I think maybe I heard it in an interview, that you used to be a mouth breather. How did you become a nose breather? And is it possible for anyone to actually listen to this and go, okay, I hear you, James, there's all these benefits. I want those benefits. How do I start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember breathing through my mouth as a kid. I see pictures of myself when I was young and I'm breathing through my mouth. Not all the time, but it definitely happened. And even until adulthood, I thought it was normal just to go to sleep with a pint of water by my bed every single night, to wake up every few hours with a dry mouth, take a swig of water, go back to sleep. I did that for decades till I met Dr. Jayakar Nayak down at Stanford. And he said, this isn't normal at all. We should be breathing through our nose all the time, especially during sleeping hours. That's a third of your life. And if you're breathing through the mouth, you're just exposing yourself to everything in your environment. And also you're loosening the tissues at the back of your throat and making yourself more apt to snore and have sleep apnea, which is another thing that blew my mind. So, once you realize how dangerous mouth breathing is, you can then take a conscious effort to change it, how you're breathing throughout the day. But that won't help you when you're unconscious at night, right? So once I learned this, I was shutting my mouth all the time, practicing nasal breathing. At the beginning, it was very difficult. I felt very congested here, but the nose is a use it or lose it organ. I also learned that from Stanford, that the more you use it, the more it's going to open up. Those tissues are going to acclimate and open up. So I focused on that. And at night, this sounds a little crazy, but I used a little piece of tape, which I still do, just on my lips to train my mouth shut at night. And this sounds a little, like new age science, but it's not, because I heard from a breathing therapist at Stanford, Ann Kearney, who had used it herself and uses it for her patients. I talked to other researchers who did the same thing. And that has helped me tremendously, and it's helped so many other people as well, and it's free.
Yeah. Hey, James, look, I'm totally with you on that. It is incredible, the difference. In fact, I actually spoke to a buddy this morning on the phone, who I've not spoken to for a few months. And I said, hey, he was saying, how's the podcast going? I said, yeah, great. I'm actually speaking to someone, James Nestor, this afternoon. You've got to get his book. It's just incredible. It's all about breathing. And he said to me that the thing he's changed a few months ago was he started to tape his mouth up at night. And he said he cannot believe the difference. He said, I don't wake up thirsty. I'm not groggy in the morning. I've got more energy, better cognition, you know. And I think for people who are skeptical, and I know they are out there, they're even within my own family, they're skeptics to how important breathing is. I think it really is quite profound what you can feel like. You may not even know how good you can feel until you start breathing in a more optimal way. But when you talk about tape over your mouth, some people, I think, will probably feel claustrophobic, and the thought of actually taping their mouth shut probably is going to scare them. But you would say it's not like that, is it?
No, and just to second what you were saying, it's one thing to have a subjective experience and say, hey, I feel better after taping, and that means something, right? But it's another thing to measure this stuff. If we can measure it, we can study it. If we can study it, we can figure out if it's actually working. And that's exactly what we did, working with NIAC at Stanford. So the measurements from these instruments aren't going to lie. Yes, I felt better, but to me, as a science journalist, it's much more convincing to have data, because what works with one person may not work with somebody else. And they're finding right now that Stanford and Kearney is booting up a study of 200 people looking at sleep apnea and snoring and sleep tape. And I so happen to have a little role here. And I want to explain to people that I would highly suggest not going on YouTube and looking how to sleep tape, because there's a lot of really sketchy stuff there. All you need is a teeny piece of tape. I use a piece that big. It's about half the size of a postage stamp. And I put it right across my lips. I can still talk to you. I can still breathe from my mouth if I want, but it just reminds me when I'm unconscious to keep my jaw shut. And I can take it off with my tongue. So this is not a hostage situation, duct tape kind of thing. This is a teeny piece of tape just to train the mouth shut. And just anecdotally, I've received several dozen emails from people who have had chronic snoring for the past few decades, who have had even mild or moderate sleep apnea, and they've recorded their sleep and they no longer suffer from those things. So that's not psychosomatic. It's not a placebo effect. That's what happens when you close your mouth and you allow that air to be pressurized, push the soft tissues further back in your airway and open them up to breathe more efficiently. You get 20% more oxygen through a nasal breath than you do through a mouth breath. And if you think that's not going to affect you over the long term, you're nuts. It will have a tremendous effect on your health. Yeah,
absolutely. In your research, you mentioned sleep apnea, and these problems we have. Sleep problems are endemic now. Sleep deprivation is an epidemic. There's many reasons for that, of course. But it's really fascinating for me that, I think back, I always try and look at the way we're suffering now, or the maladies of the 21st century, and try and put them in an evolutionary perspective, in a context to go, what's really going on here? And I don't know if in your research, did you ever come across that sleep apnea and sleep problems are quite a modern problem? I mean, do we know if this existed 300-400 years ago? Was any part of your research on this at all?
Well, we can't go back and test people, but what we can do is look at skeletons. And so I talked to the experts in the field, biological anthropologists, who look at the shape of skeletons. And our ancestors, anything older than around 400 years, maybe 500 years, they would have these very powerful jaws, and they would have these faces that grew outward and these huge nasal apertures in the back. So from those skeletons, we can decipher that these people had larger airways. They had more room to breathe. We know that obesity absolutely affects snoring and sleep apnea as well. And people were not as obese as they are now. And that seems very clear and understood. But this idea that our ancestors had these huge, powerful faces and we do not is less acknowledged, and yet it's very clear in the skeletal record. And an example of this is looking at the teeth of an ancient skeleton. If you were to look at the teeth of one of your ancestors, 400 years old, 4,000 years old, 40,000, doesn't matter, on back, they would have perfectly straight teeth. There's like a 99.9% chance perfectly straight teeth. Today, 90% of us have some sort of crookedness in our teeth because our mouths have grown so small. With a very small mouth, you also have a smaller airway. And that's one of the main reasons so many of us suffer from snoring, sleep apnea, respiratory problems. It's even implicated in asthma, allergies, and more.
Yeah, wow. And why do we think that's happened? Why have we got such a smaller mouth, smaller jaw? There's some sort of theories out there?
Yeah, there's a few theories, but there's also a few absolute facts that have been very clearly identified in the past 20 years. And that is when our food shifted from this wild, tough food where we were required to chew a lot more, food became soft, we chewed less, our mouths grew too small. Environmental inputs had some effect on that. When you're walking around breathing through your mouth, especially when you're a kid, your face will grow differently. It's so common that this is called adenoid face, from when the adenoids or tonsils inflame and you have to walk around like this. But most of it is caused by food, by the softness of our diets. And there's been some incredible research done in this. And I just think it's so under acknowledged, the role that chewing, masticatory stress, plays in the structure of our faces. But it's also so simple. The less you use something, the less it's going to develop. And especially, this is important in infancy. They've done studies where they've looked at infants who have been bottle fed versus those who have been breastfed. And when an infant is breastfed, it requires a tremendous amount of stress and exercise and helps push the face outward, which will then create a larger airway.
Yeah. You know, it's incredible. You're talking about food that we chew more. And what you're fundamentally talking about is more natural foods, less highly processed, industrialized food. So we often think about food in the context of our health, our well-being, particularly a lot of people talk about it in the context of their weight. But you're sort of saying, yeah, sure, but yes, your weight, but health and well-being is so broad. And now we're introducing mouth size and teeth strength and teeth structure and jaw structure into the potential benefits of eating real food.
Yeah, and here again is an example of all these disparate people in these disparate areas of science all coming to the same general conclusion in just slightly different ways. So we're usually looking at foods in terms of calories, at least in the US, we're looking at it in terms of calories. We're not looking at it in terms of toughness or softness. And I think it's quite interesting that even today, you think about what's considered healthy food today: oatmeal, avocados, yogurt, goo bars. All this stuff is soft. It requires basically no chewing at all. And the less you're chewing, especially when you're younger, the less you'll be working out these muscles, the less you'll be developing your face.
Yeah, and you said especially when you're younger. Now that's really interesting, because one thing, yes, as a doctor, but also as a parent, that I've always found quite curious is this idea that, the adults will eat proper food, but the kids menu, I don't know if it's the same in the States, the kids menu is generally full of junk. It's like the adults will order the proper food, but the kids will have some sort of, I don't know, hyper processed, industrialized foods. And, I am not blaming anyone or criticizing anyone for doing that. I understand that's almost the conditioning as well. But one thing we have very much tried hard from a young age with our children is they eat the same as what we do. We eat as much as we can, minimally processed, food as close to nature as possible. And, I appreciate we're lucky to be able to have access to that, but we do that, and that's what we give our kids. We don't make separate food for them. And it's just interesting, you say all roads are sort of leading to Rome in the same place. Actually, eat the right diet. It's almost like, it's basically what you're trying to say is live, eat, and breathe in the way that we have evolved to, and we will be more thriving, healthier, happier human beings, I guess.
Yeah, nature already did all of this for us. It's just in the last 100 years we thought that we were smarter than nature, and we thought we could take some sidetracks into this and condense food down to one pill or some mush that you could squirt into your mouth and it would have the same effect. Yeah, we're not getting scurvy from that or beriberi from that. We're not getting these diseases that we used to suffer from, but we're also denying ourselves so many of the benefits. And exactly what you had said, and there's this huge, I would even call it a revolution right now in baby-led weaning, which is not to give babies, infants, this soft mush in jars, which we've only been doing for the past 100 years anyway. And look at what's happened. Look at what's happened to our weight. Look at what's happened to our faces. Look what happened to our teeth. I mean, on and on and on. That is a modern invention. So to allow kids, especially early on, to be able to really work out that masticatory stress, to chew properly, is going to have benefits down the road. And that's been very well proven at this time.
Yeah, and it really, the phrase use it or lose it, which is common parlance in the English language, both in the US and in the UK. We understand that, don't we, with muscles? We get that. If I do a bicep curl every morning, my bicep is going to get stronger. If I stop doing it, over time, it's going to get smaller. I think we understand that with our physical muscles. But as you say, I don't think we've thought about it in terms of our jaw, our mastication muscles. It's like if you don't chew regularly, if you're not sort of having that stress put on your jaw, like the stress on the bicep, well, your jaw is then going to adapt, isn't it? It's going to adapt to what it feels that you need. I think I've heard you mention before that there's something about chewing on one side as opposed to two sides, and I found that really interesting. So I'd love to just explore that, but I also just want to make sure we've covered that many people listen to this show. Some, I'm sure, are avid meat eaters. Some are vegans. And when we talk about natural food, I think it's just important to say you can probably, whilst obviously meat is quite tough and there's bones to chew on, there's a lot of vegetables like carrots, for example, or a lot of tough veg that you have to chew. You can probably also get that sort of stress on the jaw, right? So I just want to make sure we include everyone in this conversation, that they all feel as though this applies to them. So I wonder if you could just expand on that at all.
Means to the same end. That's again, you've got these different people in these different camps. But of course, if you're chewing on carrots, if you're chewing on celery, I mean, just think of natural foods. Even wheat, we got really good at removing the bran and the germ from wheat and creating this processed white flour. And the same thing with rice, white rice, bran and germ removed. We just have this little seed left. So chewing is essential, especially early on, to developing proper airway health, proper mouth. We know that. And it's how you chew, what you're chewing is, I don't want to get into that. That gets very, very political, because the carnivores are going to say one thing, vegans are going to say the other. But do not underestimate the power and benefits of chewing. And this is a whole new science that is really being deeply explored now, which I find is fascinating.
A lot of people these days are suffering with the effects of stress, the consequences of being chronically stressed and not actually adequately recuperating from that. And everyone's looking for the hack. What can I do to keep my life super, super busy, but what can I do that's going to somehow magically de-stress me? And it's fascinating for me that breathing could well be one of the simplest and one of the most accessible things to all of us, yet it's something that very few of us are actively looking at and actively practicing. Why do you think that is?
I think we've moved ourselves far enough away from inside out understanding that outside in has become our go-to default. I look at my phone for an answer to something, right? I'm on social media for things, for answers to things. I look at heart rate monitors for things. I look, it continues to add up on the outside in so we're missing there's a big variant in that. Like there's a big variation in that, because to understand how you feel, you have to go in. You have to go to the base layer of what's going on. And at the fundamental layer of all of this is breathing. And so actually taking the time to actually reorganize and feel things. Most people, if we were to introduce some sort of a minor breath practice, like the superventilation stuff we did yesterday, that'll stimulate anybody, right? Anybody's going to feel that. But if we do slow controlled breathing, a lot of people may have problems with that and not feel that just as quickly. And it's more of a long-term thing. So it's something people have to actually put discipline in, right? To understand it. But that's, and this is where that outside in thing comes. People are so stressed out, and it's like, that's all just a conceptualization. That's just story. That's just a narrative. We are designed to handle stress at very high output. And maybe, and then I'm stealing this from a friend of ours, David Bidler, but maybe it's not that we have a disorder. Maybe it's not that, anxiety and all this stress is actually disorder. Maybe this is just a natural reaction to the amount of stimulus, to the stimulus that we're taking in from the outside and not paying attention to things from the inside. Because when I've met and worked with a lot of high level people, whether athletes, executives, whoever, right? The people that are functioning the highest are shutting out everything else. They're in their environment and what they're in. Like the conversation you and I are having right now. I'm not thinking about the drive that I've got to go do, except right now when I say that, right now I'm distracting myself. And so this is where the context of things starts to happen. And then I start to overload more because I'm in an environment I should be paying attention to, and I'm not feeling what's going on with that and present in that situation. And so breathing is that thing that I can go and bring myself right back and stop a lot of the physiological ramifications of that stuff.
Sure. I mean, we'll get into the mechanics of that shortly. The thing that really resonates with me from what you just said is this whole idea that maybe anxiety or, a whole list of other complaints is an appropriate response to the environment in which we're living. And, as a doctor, this is something I've been wrestling with for a good 5 to 10 years now, that actually, a lot of the time, I think that the body is really smart. The body is clever. The body does what it is meant to do. I spoke to Johan Hari. I don't know if you know Johan. He wrote the book Lost Connections on.
Yeah, I've read.
We had just a phenomenal conversation for about 2 hours on this podcast a few months ago. And again, it's that whole idea that maybe the way we're feeling, this chronic epidemic of lifestyle-driven disease, is actually our bodies doing what they should be doing in a very toxic environment. I went on your Art of Breath course yesterday with you and Rob were teaching, and the other
Danny
and Danny as well, which is fantastic. But I got there slightly rushed. I had to fly in from Santa Rosa to California. And we had a chat when I got there, and it was super interesting that you consciously have made a decision, from what I understand, to not live in an environment where you will constantly be fighting these stressful inputs around you. You put yourself into an environment of nature, of calm, of peace. Was that intentional?
Yeah. We call that, and I'll give this to Rob Wilson, paying attention. If you're paying attention to what's going on in you, you start to feel the aspects of your environment. That doesn't mean I couldn't live in LA. I 40 years I spent in this LA basin, right? And I was perfectly fine. It's just I got away 3 years ago into nature out in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, and spent a year there, like 7 acres, 30 minutes from a real town, in the forest. And I got to know myself. And I really got to know myself. And I had already started doing work to start to feel what was going on in me. But it wasn't until I actually understood, like, oh, this is why people actually get away or unplug, right? And you can do that in spaces like LA. And I actually had this very conversation at a barbecue we went to after the seminar yesterday with Dr. Tanya Bentley, who runs the foundation that we work with, at her house. And they live up in a canyon in what seems to be not LA.
Yeah.
And her husband and I were having this conversation, and he literally was just like, I don't know how you do it here outside of this. And I'm like, I get it. Like, I get that. And I don't think enough people understand that there's gotta be this is where that hack world has to come in if we're existing in these places. Right? Is we have to actually start to hack things, and breathing is one of those hacks, because I actually believe that if we were still out there, meaning still out in nature, still trying to survive, right? Like cave people, right? Like, we wouldn't even need to be worrying about breathing, because we'd be existing in a natural environment, responding to that natural environment in the way that we should have, right? Versus putting ourselves into places where comfort and convenience and the illusion of safety becomes this very, it encompasses our entire life.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it is in this environment we need to think about breathing. It is in this environment we need to think about physical activity, because I guess, you know, in many environments around the world, in these so-called blue zones where people are living to, 100 plus with very low rates of chronic disease, they're not trying to be physically active. They're not trying to have low stress levels. They're not trying to eat healthy food. Their environment is set up where that is the norm for them. So they don't have to think about, I need to go to the gym to work out, because they're moving every day. They're moving to get their food out of the ground, and they're walking around to see their friends and their family. And so, we have to now think about these tools that we need in this modern environment. Mm-hmm. A lot of people listening to this will probably be thinking, well, it's all very well moving out to nature, but I don't have access to that. And so why the breath really fascinates me, because I've worked in many different areas. I've looked after affluent patients. I've also looked after very deprived patients. Mm-hmm. And I guess breathing is free. Mm. Breathing is accessible to everybody. Mm. And then what that naturally lends itself to is, if you have control over your breath, even if you are living in an inner city where there is a lot of noise around you and there's a lot of inputs that you are constantly having to fight off, well, at least you have a tool like a shield where you can use for your body to help you survive in that environment. Is that fair to say?
Totally fair. It's absolutely fair. That's where this comes in. And it even can come in when when you're on vacation or you're in the middle of nowhere nature, right? Or camping or whatever. But this is absolutely where it does come in. And it's our ability to shift our state, right? To be the ability, because we're not staying focused anymore. Like ADD, I've got anxiety. Well, if you're dealing with anxiety, like you're just not responding to your current environment. You're thinking of an environment outside of your environment, and you're doing a lot of other stuff that's going on versus actually responding to the current thing that's going on, right? And I understand this intimately. Is I'm that type A person who will overwhelm myself and bite off more than I can chew, and figure that out, right? Like, oh, okay, I overshot the mark here. I need to pull back. Like I need to stop with all this stimulus. Like I chose not to fly down here this trip, because I'm on planes pretty frequently and I'm going boom, boom, boom. And I decided a 5.5 hour drive both ways will allow me to decompress in a way that jumping on an airplane and being back quickly won't.
Yeah.
Right. So it becomes, what's my environment? So I can't exist in a big city or in a city or not in nature. And I just have to manipulate my environment or listen to my environment in a way that allows me to kind of just be in that place. Right. And breathing is that one of those things that literally brings you, it's why every meditation practice has breathing at the foundation. It really brings you right to that focal point.
It's funny that I think back to when I started doing things like, you know, when I was started working out when I was like 15 or 16, and, you know, you'd read the magazines or you'd read what you should be doing. And they'd always say, you know, when, you know, like, I don't know, a bench press, let's say, you, on the way back up, exhale. I used to ignore that stuff. I used to just think, what's the exercise? What's the mechanical exercise that I need to do? You know, who cares if you're breathing in on the way in and breathing out on the way back up? And now, with the knowledge I have now, I look back and go, wow, how naive was I? And then you can really expand that across, you know, you mentioned these ancient practices like yoga.
Yeah.
Yoga has got breathing at the heart of it. Yet many yoga classes I've been to, certainly a few years ago, and the way I see many people around me practicing yoga is they feel it's a physical practice. I want to be able to stretch my hamstrings so that I can get in this position, almost ignoring the breath part of it. And I've really gone like completely 180 on this, in the sense that I actually think that breathing is at the heart. You get that right, then the physical actions that you want actually follow very, very easily. And you had this beautiful phrase, I think I heard you say once, mind is the king of the senses, breath is the king of the mind.
That's BKS Iyengar. That's me quoting.
That's you quoting him.
Yeah.
I mean, that is phenomenal. We can maybe unpack that. But do you feel that in the West today, in the 21st century, when we think about working out, movement, yoga, whatever physical practice it is, going to the gym, CrossFit, have we forgotten about the breath?
I would say by and large, most people participating in yoga practice right now around the world are not participating in the way that it was designed. And that doesn't mean I understand it to its totality, but I've been teaching movement and principles of movement for almost 20 years. And we have come to the realization that the way you move is the way you breathe. And thus controlling the breath controls the way you move. And so yoga nailed this in the beginning and at the foundation with people who actually understand these deep principles, but we all kind of get lost in all these different mediums. And it's not just yoga, like you talk about CrossFit, running, all of these things, we whatever the medium is, we lose sight of what we're trying to do because we get caught up in I'm going to burn some calories. I'm going to get bigger. I'm going to get more flexible. No, those are all byproducts of what this does. And why are we doing this? You know, and it's like you brought up the blue zones. And it's interesting about the blue zones is, you know, in no blue zone is anybody going to the gym. So if you're going to sit there and quote, not you, if people are going to sit there and talk about blue zones and what people in the blue zones eat and do and use that to an advantage, well, you better take to consideration that these people live in nature, basically.
Yeah.
Like they live far from things and they're doing the work based on a lifestyle that most of us, especially using the blue zones as this idea, are doing. And so commit to something like that. And that's all I've done a little bit. Like I'm not doing that fully in any way, shape or form. I'm manipulating the environment in order to suit for how I live a more qualitative life and feel that life. And I'm not looking for necessary longevity of life. I'm looking for quality of life because I mean, I've experienced things like this is a very big rabbit hole, but you just need an abrupt check in your life to really understand things usually. I mean, most of us, you know, and I mean, a little over a year ago, I thought I broke my neck, woke up on the ground and, you know, I had a massive contusion between C3, C4 that I hit my head going up a ladder playing tag with my nephews and woke up on the ground and I couldn't move. And I was like, oh, something's wrong. And that event altered how I started really, even though I was thinking about life being this fragile, quick thing, it really was, oh, you just don't even know. You don't even know when it's coming. And yet we behave as though, especially the hacker world, we behave like there's so much fear around dying that it's like, embrace death. Everything's a death. And come to the conclusion that what you're feeling is allowing you to really experience life. And that's in essence why breath at the foundation, and why these yogis and why these people were talking about this, is because it is the center of what it is we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, we're so busy these days, right? Nobody's got time. I really do feel, I've been asked this before, what is the biggest stress in modern society? And my view, and there are multiple ones, my view is it's the erosion of downtime. The fact that we don't have downtime in our lives anymore. Every single minute we look at these damn phones. We get up in the morning, we look at these phones, we stand in line in the coffee shop, and instead of daydreaming and letting our DMN, our default mode network, kick into gear and actually start to solve problems and be creative for us, we're consuming. And you mentioned often we need something abrupt. And, for me, one of the turning points in my life was when my father died, 6.5 years ago. And I used to help, I moved back to where I grew up to help care for my dad for like 10, 15 years. And when my dad died, it forced me to start confronting various things in my life. Was I living the life that I wanted to? Was I simply a mirror reflection of everything I'd grown up around? Or, who was the real me? And I find that as I've gone down that path, and it's a big rabbit hole, but I think it's the most rewarding rabbit hole you'll ever go down, starting to understand myself better. I would have time because Dad wasn't here anymore. All this time that I previously would spend with him, carrying him, showering him, washing him, shaving him, all this kind of stuff. Suddenly with that time, I'd go for a walk. I'd just go and daydream, and I'd start to reflect. And I thought, wow, I've not had time to reflect, to self-reflect on my life, my entire life, but certainly my whole adult life until that point. And once I found that time, once that time was given to me, everything in my life started to come online. I've created a life that I love. I love what I do in my career. I feel very close with my wife and my kids. I feel that I know who I am. And in the last 6 to 12 months, I no longer have a fear of death. And that was quite a long story to try and get to that point. But but it's when you do the internal work, I feel that it leads you to your breath, actually, because after you strip away a few of these layers of the onion, you start to, it takes you to your breath, and you realize, actually, for me, the next level of spiritual growth, if you want to call it, or sort of self-exploration, is to sort of get control of my breath and understand it, and actually start to, really start to play around with it and see how it impacts my mood, how it impacts my states. And I get the impression from, as I say, it's been a few months that I've come across your work, and I get the impression that underneath the breath, there's also been a lot of personal growth with you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It transformed everything about what I've worked on. I mean, I'd been in the self-help stuff for 20 years, like looking at it, reading it, going through, seeing therapists, going to programs, workshops, all this stuff, this guru, that guru, like all of it, like, hey, what can I learn here? And it wasn't really until I invested in this that any of that really made any sense. And now it's like, we joke about it, but I like the real depth of things, like the true depth of it, like looking at the heart of what my reaction is to something, and I think that is like, that's the gateway opening. That is the entire thing, is looking at and understanding. And we were having this conversation offline, but it's like somebody reacting to you online or something, and how it used to affect us before, and I was the same. It used to affect me. And now it's like, I actually understand the behavior, and I can have compassion towards that and understand where somebody's at, because it's not actually being directed at me. This is actually something that is an internal issue in not understanding. And so somebody just doesn't have the tools quite yet to get that. And I think our job to some degree is to, since we've decided to take this exploration on, is to explain what those tools are.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, it's almost, I got that sense from you and your team yesterday at Art of Breath that there's almost a deep sense of obligation there as you have got this awareness, you've developed your understanding. It's almost like something you have to spread with the world. You have to understand it more. You have to be able to communicate it and reach people, because it is potentially controlling your breath. Controlling your breath is probably the wrong terminology. Having an awareness of your breath, understanding your breath, being able to manipulate your breath for certain situations is arguably one of the most powerful tools we have. Yet most of us we do have access, but we don't feel we've got access to it. And we don't have the knowledge to access it either.
Yeah. I mean, Eckhart Tolle talks candidly about, he just openly will just say, just be aware of your breath. Like, just be conscious of your breath. Like, get awareness of that. He doesn't give anything else up, right? Yeah. Like, he's not like, hey, use this pattern to do there's none of that. Right. And I'm only bringing him up because, here's a guy who's really risen up to the top and some very basic, simple ideas in, this self-help or even spiritual realm. Right. And it's great because I think that just the ability to become aware, but most people can't sit there and be aware of their breath. And this is where practices like Vipassana have come in and done tremendous work to where it's like, hey, you're going to go 10 days. Silent meditation, and you're just going to learn to be aware of your breath, and that's it. And after like 3 days, you've felt like you've never been through more pain in your entire life, right? And then all of a sudden you become aware of things as this 10 days comes to a close, right? But I don't think that's actually necessary for everybody, but maybe it is. Like, not everybody should need to go run 100 miles, but I did, and I got that experience and I understand that. And just sitting there and being quiet and paying attention to your breath for maybe 2 minutes or 5 minutes, or if you can do 10 minutes, and you can just continue to do that is enough. That'll teach you more than most things will, because and the reason is because your breath is connected to everything we're doing. Like, it is that thing that's connected to what we're doing. So it responds to the environment. And so becoming aware of that literally opens up the doorway of, oh, I'm just not paying attention to my environment right now. Or, if there is a lion in the corridor, like you should notice your potentially that's not somewhere where you need to stop and be aware of your breathing, but you'll see in those instances where breaths get hold and then breaths picks up, right? High, stress situations, so it's just, this becomes a very big opening if you can just be aware of it. Now, the optimization factor comes into where I start learning how to manipulate that to bring myself more present or to downshift myself more.
With the breath, we have shown recently in a brain scan to be able to willfully activate the neural activity, not 16 or 17%, but 100 through specific breathing exercises. We have been in the old paradigm, which is actually a narrowed consciousness, a narrowed neurological network within us, and it enables us to have partially control over our own brain. And that's the thing. We don't own our own brain, our own deceit of the mind. We don't own it. We are not born that way, not told that way, not schooled that way. But I know we are able to captivate, to learn to control 100% of our own potential. And that is only logical. We are not born with a piece of meat called the brain to be 84% without our control within our head. That is not evolution. Evolution is that what you are is what you need. And then as being young to become adult, not only physically, but spiritually, we grow into 100% usage of our unlimited power of our mind. And through the life force, thus, in this exercise we did there within 25 minutes, bringing for sure the people over 2 minutes to 3 minutes without air in the lungs, is showing that we are able consciously to be in control over the biochemistry in the blood, in the neurology of ours, and opening up past the conditioning of the narrow mindedness, the narrow down consciousness, which is neurology, to go past and to have a tremendous tranquil feeling, sensation, while holding in a very stressful situation of having no air in the lungs for 3 minutes. What is happening? We are just entering with that on the threshold of the power of the mind. And the mind, do not confuse the mind with just thoughts. It is a complete different dimension where we are able to get into and learn to control, to be conscious, and enter consciously thus into paradise. This is if we talk about yoga or the Bible or the Quran, they all talk about the paradise. Well, the paradise, and in the Bhagavad Gita they call it, they talk about it, the nirvana, and in the Bible they call it the Garden of Eden, the paradise, and it's all there, man. There is no fears, nothing there. And the Mohammedans, they call it when you wake up after you have lived. No, while you are alive, you are able to enter with this powerful tool of ours, our mind, through the heart, which understands more than words, the greatness, the fullness of who we are and what we are. And we are now at a time of change. You see the governments, you see the disease, and they are not able to control because Mother Nature is knocking at our door. Our divine mother is knocking at our heaven's door. Wake up, guys. Wake up to your true potential, because you are beautiful, all. And until it's not showing completely been taken on in the world, I keep on showing through science. And so I'm doing right now with top researchers in the world on the DNA, and show that we have the absolute influence neurologically at will to enter into our own ancestral encrypted codes of the DNA, our genetical past, to enlighten our past right here in the moment, here and now. That is our purpose. That's why we talk to each other. But before people begin to understand what is the soul all about, to be fully expressed, to be in the paradise already fully there, being able to how do you say, share, to feel the presence of it all, we will show the people how to battle disease. Much better than science has stated up till now. How to learn to regulate our mood. Much better than the psychiatry knows. And I've already shown this scientifically with groups of people. And so let's make it baby steps before we enter into the full potential of ours.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Wim, for that. One thing that I really like about your approach is that I've heard you say that you're not special. And why I really think this is important. People listening to this, people watching this may go, hey man, you're different. You know, you have been up to the top of Kilimanjaro in your shorts. You have been in an ice bath for, you know, however many hours. You know, you're in the Guinness Book of Records, right? What you do has no relevance to me. And what I think is powerful about your approach is you say, hey, look, you can all do this. I'm not special. What the tools that you're using are available to every single human being. I wonder if you could explain that for people.
Yes. So, for example, depression is on the rise. Depression is on the rise in our new generations, young people. What is this? This is absolutely lack of purpose. Purpose is life. Life is purpose. It's the full vibrancy of life. That's the purpose as it is. It goes past words. It is there. It's pure. It's beautiful. It's there. It's the soul, full bloom. No, people get depressed. So we are able to shoot people to the moon, but we are not able to regulate our own mood. We have not been learned or schooled in our schools. Rocket science, yes, history and mathematics. But to be happy, we don't know. We don't know. So there we are, poor. We are poor within ourselves because we don't know the core values of our life itself. And now we come, and we are doing the studies right now on depression, bipolar, and we are showing that we found the keys to go within the brain consciously, to go consciously inside of the brain and to regulate what is out of order. To get into the emotion. Everybody wants to feel happy, only nobody knows how to do it. Get a hold over your own hormonal system, the endocrine system. We have shown this very strongly. Not little bit of significant change in a scientific comparative study. No, big, unknown. So for the guys, for the people listening, depression, your mood, learn to regulate your feeling. Is that possible? Yes, it has come. Natural knowledge through science showing irrefutably the evidence that we are able to willfully control our own mood. That is number one. So that one is there, guys. Just look it up. We got all the films, we got the data, we got the analysis, we got the publications. So it's there. It's for you to take up. Do you want to be happy? Happy, pappy? Take them on. Take them on. It's there. Hey, yeah. Party time. Party time. Let's celebrate the moment of enlightenment, that the burden of life and feeling miserable and bad feelings and all that, moods changes and all, is the past paradigm. Part of the past paradigm. This is a new time of enlightenment where you are able to enlighten your own burden, your own heaviness in the biochemistry, in your neurology. It has been shown. That is number one. Number two, inflammation. Cause and effect of disease is inflammation. Infection, inflammation, it's all caused by inflammation, inflammatory markers. And we have shown people being injected after a couple of days, and this was after 16,000 people taking the same experimental model with an injection of a E. coli bacteria, becoming sick for 3 to 6 hours. Now suddenly I trained a group of people within a couple of days. They took the injection, and after 16,000 people who became sick, suddenly 12 people exposed into the same experimental model were able to nullify the reaction caused by the E. coli bacteria on the immune system. They did not become sick. And then they found out that these guys, through blood samples, so there is no speculation about it, had a control over the autonomic nervous system, over the immune system, far more than was stated in science. And I'm trying to tell that through science and through publications in the best of papers in the world, and try to get it to the people. And I think these podcasts, like we do right now, is the way to get there to the people, to the listeners. Disease and mood, feeling happy, it's your choice.
When you've taken a group who've had this injection, but I think a few years ago I read about when you did it for the first time. I think from recollection, you were injected with lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, which is this endotoxin. And I know as a doctor, I've seen the studies, I've seen the trials. If somebody gets injected with that, they typically will go into septic shock. They'll drop their blood pressure, they'll become very unwell. But you managed to not get sick by controlling your immune system. So I'd love to hear about that, because you were injected with it. What happened? Did you feel something? Did you feel yourself starting to get sick? Did you breathe in preparation of that? Or once you felt it, were you able to then control it? I'd love to understand that. It's so interesting to me that you had this endotoxin in your vein, but you didn't get sick.
Yes, exactly. So when the professor injected me, he said, oh, but it takes an hour before it's really working. I said, no, it is being injected now. Now I'm going to start. I'm just going to try. I do my best. That's what I said. I was for sure determined to succeed in my attempt to show that the immune system, the innate immune system, and the specific immune system both can be activated at will, influenced at will. So the innate immune system, for example, get it down. And the specific immune system, get it on. So specific solutions at the core, at the start of things happen. So what I did, I started my breathing exercises. When he injected me, I began to start. You see how simple it is? Determined, my mind was not out there, my mind was in the breath. In the biochemistry, neurology influences the biochemistry. It's logic. So I was into the breathing, and then when normally the polysaccharide had to have its influence, like uncontrolled shivering, headaches, fever, all over agony, back aches, muscle aches, things, even vomiting. All that can happen, for sure. That it happens a lot. Nothing happened. Nothing. They came to me. They said, "Yeah, it's now at its peak." I said, but before they told me, I asked them, "When is it going to happen?" And then he said, "Yeah, actually, it is now at its peak." They said, "Yeah, I do not really feel something." So
Can I so basically, let's say a week before you were practicing your own breathing techniques at home, right? Was this just like you being in the hospital and you're just practicing as per usual? Yes, you're getting injected, but you didn't feel anything. You could be in your own bedroom doing the same thing, right?
So there I go and say everybody is able to do this. And yes, directly afterwards they said, because they saw such a low cytokine release, the cytokine storm was less than a breeze. I felt good. And at a certain moment, I let the breathing go, and a little bit came to me, a little bit. But I did not do, I had won, I had done. I had shown what breathing techniques are able to do together with your determination. You're being here in the now. Here and now, you have neurology. When I say I don't know if you have children, yes or no?
I do, but 2 children, yes.
Yes, so if I would say, your children are in danger, for real. So then you would be full of epinephrine, adrenaline, and run like an animal towards where are they, and find out, and all that, barely in control. Now, that is what happened at that moment. The epinephrine got so high, it went higher in the blood, and they compared it to another study wherein people jumped for the first time into a bungee jump. They took the blood of those people, and the level of adrenaline within the people lying there on the bed was higher than the people going for the first time into a bungee jump. You see?
Yeah.
That is what we do with these breathing techniques. We enter consciously into the depth of our brain, the brainstem. Into the brainstem, and thus the adrenal axis is being activated, it resets the body, and then suddenly the immune system is much more alert, and it is able to handle bacillus and virus and bacteria in any kind, because that's the nature of ours. Only we alienate it from our own brain. They say we have 16% control within our own brain. It's like you have a house and only 16% of your own house are able to be accessed by you. The rest is of the government or by the people in power. I don't know who, but it is 100%, my friend. Rangan, my friend, Rangan, it is 100%. 100%, and that means we are able to tap into our emotional areas of the brain, into our opioids, into our cannabinoids, endorphins, serotonins, adrenal axis, anything that is within our brain is ours to be commanded by us. And I think nature has it built in. A happy person doesn't make war. A happy person is not into thieving or taking what is not his. A happy person is like radiating positive energy all the time. And he is happy, and that's where he wants to stay. Only we did not know how to get there. And now we found these ways. And in brain scans showing that we are able to tap into those areas of the brain, the autonomous processes of the brain. This is the way they published it. We found the compelling evidence of the key components of the autonomous processes in the brain related to mood regulation. So we found the keys into those areas which were not controllable at will. Now we found them. And now we are able to regulate our mood, and that is emotion. And that emotion is who we are, what we are, and the source and the power of sanity is happiness. Happiness all the time. That's irradiance. That is flow. That is uninhibited flow. That is not narrowed consciousness, a narrowed perception, narrowed neurology. It's full bloom neurology. We are born to be holy beings, not half beings, holy beings. That means 100% neurology, sane, insanity, full flow, going within our beautiful mind, our command. That's what it is. And I'm just giving evidence through science. You can look it up. Only the old paradigm is about, shit happens, wars, that is human-like, abuse, humans, insensitivity, exploiting the world, sodomizing the planet, polluting the planet. It's all there. We don't know. It doesn't make sense. And this time we are to bring sense to the people that they are in control over their own happiness, which is the hormonal system, their own health, which is their immune system, and their own power, strength, energy, which are the metabolic processes in the cell. And we are able to control all the three of them. Yeah. That's the message.
And what I really love about breath work per se is it's free. Right? It's not something that people have to spend a lot of money on. It's something that the richest in society and the poorest in society have access to. And I think that's really, really exciting.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this conversation, there's loads more like it on my channel. Please do press subscribe and hit that bell. Now, back to the conversation.
We can almost induce a feeling of anxiety and panic by changing the way that we breathe.
Of course we can. And if anyone wants to do that, you can start breathing in this very unhealthy way right now. You will stimulate a sympathetic response, and that's easily measured. So I thought this was interesting as well. At UCSF, which is very close to my house, University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Margaret Chesney had worked for decades on National Institutes of Health research looking into something called continuous partial awareness, also known as email apnea. And what she had found was that when we sit down at our desks in the morning, one estimate says that 80% of office workers do this. We open up our email, got Zoom on, got Twitter on. So, oh my God, I have 60 emails. We stop breathing. We just stop breathing, and then we go. So she called it email apnea because we're so distracted and stressed out by what's going on. If you think about when you're extremely, let's say there's a tiger coming around the corner here of my house. What am I going to do? I'm going to be silent because that is a reflex reaction to be very scared, to be silent so you don't become prey. And once it's on, once the fight is on, I'm going to breathe a ton to get more energy to my body, to feed more energy to my brain and heart and other essential muscles to get me out of that situation or to fight off that thing. But we do the same thing unconsciously at work. Even though there's no tiger around, even though there's nothing threatening us, our sense of threat has become so sensitized that so many of us will stop breathing or start breathing completely dysfunctional. And she's found that if you do this for long enough, it can have some of the same effects on us as sleep apnea. By that, I mean neurological disorders, physical problems, again, spiking blood glucose, adrenaline. And it's just something so few of us are aware of. And I was wearing a pulse ox and all these different measuring what happened. Every morning I put this stuff on and sit down. My breathing would go to hell every single morning. And I realized that, that's probably a reason why around 11:30 I used to get the slight headache, used to feel kind of fatigued. It was still morning time and I wasn't full of energy. And so by just switching your breathing, again, you can allow your body to work so much more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that. And I think that term email apnea is brilliant because it just brings it to life for people that, wow, who doesn't check email every day? Who doesn't spend a lot of time on their computers, particularly now more than ever? And I really, I can't stop shaking the feeling. You mentioned the tiger, right, that might be popping around the block in San Francisco, around from where you live, which I hope is not happening. But your body's actually doing what it's meant to do in response to a threat. Your body is meant to become anxious. It's meant to become hypervigilant. Your blood sugar's meant to go up, right? Your blood pressure's meant to go up. All these things are happening to prepare you for danger so that you can escape from that danger. So actually, your body is functioning the way it is designed to function, given the fact that it perceives there to be a threat. So the problem is that we're perceiving the email inbox or the multiple screens open to be a threat. So your body is reacting in the same way. So it's not that there's anything wrong with people, right? I think it's very empowering this. Your body's not broken. Actually, your body's doing what it's meant to do. You just got to give it a different signal. You've got to just teach it, go, hey, you know what? I'm not in danger. There isn't a tiger there. It's just 20 emails, right? So I'm a big fan of talking to patients about transition times. So a transition time, let's say from work to home life, instead of just coming all ramped up from work into then trying to relax with your partner and your children, maybe have a 5-minute transition where you do some breathing or you do some yoga, something just to move you, shift you from one gear to the other gear. And I've been talking to a lot of people, particularly during the pandemic, about Zoom calls. I said, before you eat your lunch, just take a couple of minutes, maybe get outside in the garden if you're lucky to have one, maybe just slow down your breathing, do 2 minutes of nasal breathing, put your body in a different state, and you will digest your food better. You'll crave different amounts. And I've actually seen, James, I'm not sure if you've come across this. I've not seen any research to support this, but I have seen with some patients in the last few years who thought they were reacting to a certain food. Now, of course, some people do react to certain foods, whether an intolerance or an allergy, but sometimes I realized they were reacting to the way that their body was whilst they were eating. So when they did a couple of minutes, I have a breath called the 3-4-5 breath, which I've been recommending for many years. Again, a similar theme, right? A longer exhale than an inhale. But people who try that 3-4-5 breath for 2 minutes before they have their dinner, sometimes they would say, hey, I'm not actually reacting to that food anymore. So I am saying, well, maybe it's about that you're eating in a completely stressed out state. Your body's not able to receive that food. But when you chill out and relax, your body's like, hey, this food is okay.
Absolutely right. Again, it comes down to nature. And I thought you made a really good point there. There's nothing wrong with us feeding more circulation to our skeletal muscles when we get threatened. This is really good. This is what allowed our species to survive in the wild for so long. It's that perceived danger and that perceived threat that is so sensitized right now that people will react to an email the same way that they would have reacted 1,000 years ago to that tiger or to being attacked by a mammoth or whatever. And so, a lot of this is psychological, but the neat thing about breathing is by changing the way in which you breathe, you can actually change how your mind is processing thoughts and feelings and emotions. And we know that because this is a two-way street. So there are signals coming from your brain telling your organs what to do, but there are also signals coming from your organs telling your brain what to do. So another reason why that slower breathing works, you're like, I can actually, not only do I feel better, I can think more clearly. Not a placebo. This is how it works in our bodies. And it's so important to acknowledge this throughout the day. Those transition times, what a wonderful thing to do, especially before a meal, especially if you have gut issues. Take a couple minutes, that's not asking a lot, breathe calmly, relax yourself, and go in and eat. And I think that you'd be amazed by how quickly you will show benefits of digestion. I don't think it's too much of a mystery why in so many cultures there's grace before a meal.
Right.
You sit down, you calmly recite whatever phrase, doesn't matter what religion. You sit there a moment, you be thankful for the food you're about to eat, then you eat it. I think that there is a scientific foundation for how effective that is.
I completely agree. And actually, a few weeks ago, I finished writing my 4th book on weight loss for people who are looking to lose weight. And I've written a section on this exact area, exactly what you say, that actually, I don't think this is by accident. There are many benefits of doing this. And it's reflective of our busy modern culture. We don't have time for this kind of stuff. We've evolved as humans. We don't need all that kind of slow stuff, that gratitude, that grace. But you know what? We're realizing more than ever now, actually, we are. As you say, it's a lost art. It's a lost art.
Just speaking to that, this 5.5 breaths a minute, 5.5 second inhale, exhale, this is nothing new either. This was all adapted, researchers found, from prayers, from Buddhist prayers, from Kundalini yoga prayers, from Catholic prayers. all of them that they looked at locked in to this respiration rate of about 5.5 seconds. And these Italian researchers said, this is probably no coincidence. All these different cultures came to the same conclusion that, wow, we feel so much more connected to ourselves, to the universe, to everything by reciting this prayer. A lot of that had to do, this is what the researchers said, to the respiration rate, to breathing in this certain way to calm your body and make you more receptive to that message.
Yeah, thanks, James. I was chatting to my videographer, Gareth, who's just nipped out at the moment. And I was saying, hey, I'm going to talk to James. I know since you heard my chats with Patrick and Brian, he's changed his life. You know, he's tried the mouth taping at night. He sleeps better. He now runs. He does some light jogging, only nasal breathing, and really feeling the benefits. But he said one thing I wonder if you could ask James about is he says, when I go upstairs now, if I go up a lot of stairs and I nasal breathe, my recovery is so much quicker than when I mouth breathe. Well, you've already answered that, really. You said that throughout this conversation. You're basically saying your physiology changes. It works more optimally when we breathe through our nose as opposed to our mouth. But there is another kind of real life example. This was minutes before we started the call today. He said, you know, it's just incredible. And you mentioned athletes, and I just wonder if you could briefly, I mean, the time that we've got left, I'd love to cover this and also maybe some of those more super breathing techniques. So we could just cover athletics and kind of recovery and why people really should make that effort. I think it would be super helpful.
So the key with athletic performance is you want to do more for longer in a state of pure efficiency. And we know that nasal breathing is going to allow you to perform harder with a lower heart rate. You're going to be getting more oxygen more efficiently by breathing less. Again, we know how counterintuitive this is, but the science is very clear on that. And you can see this with professional athletes who have adopted to nasal breathing. Sania Richards-Ross, the best runner, sprinter for 10 years going. It's fascinating to look at pictures of her in the Olympics. Closed mouth, nasal breathing, all of her competitors beside her, breathing through the mouth. She's in front of the line, winning golds time and time again. And she's just one example of what we've already known for decades. Dr. John Douillard has done tons of science, tons of work in this, looking at cyclists, nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, and looking at their endurance, looking at their performance, and looking at recovery. And it is such a drastic difference between those two. One reason why a lot of people give up is they try nasal breathing. They've been habitually mouth breathing while they're jogging for sometimes decades. They try nasal breathing and they're like, I can't get enough air in there. I'm giving up. But sometimes it can take weeks or even months to truly acclimate this organ here to breathe properly. But once you do, the benefits are huge. And check out the work by Phil Maffetone, Dr. John Douillard, and some of the athletes that have adopted proper nasal breathing. Or try, most importantly, try it yourself. And you can very clearly see the difference.
I would say to people, because I've literally been experimenting this for maybe 12, 18 months now. You know, when I go for a walk, I'm nasal breathing. Like it's, you know, no question, I will make sure. I don't think about it now because I know I do it. But initially I had to, you know, consciously think about it. I do, you know, I take the kids for walks. We all go, we're all sort of trying to spot if one of us is mouth breathing. So I'm trying to instill it in my kids from a young age that this is important. Actually, I went for a run with my son yesterday. He's like, Daddy, look, that guy's running, he's mouth breathing. That guy's mouth breathing. I'm like, I'm sort of conflicted. Have I started something in him? I'm not sure. But on one level, I like it because I think, okay, as you said before, awareness is key, right? Without awareness, we can't make any change. So first of all, let's be aware of what's happening. Let's not beat ourselves up. Be aware. Then let's go, well, maybe I'll start with a walk. Maybe a 5-minute walk each day, nasal breathing, and see how you go. And for me personally, now I sort of am getting into running. I was going to buy a heart rate monitor. And I thought, you know what? Forget it. I sort of don't want more and more tech in my life. I'm trying to sort of go more minimalist. And I use nasal breathing as my barometer. As soon as I go too fast where I cannot nasal breathe and I have to open my mouth, that's my trigger to slow down. And I really feel I'm getting more efficient, and it feels really good. And you know what? I'm not stiff the next day or that evening. I recover quickly. Again, I will admit this is a subjective experience, but it backs up the data and the science that you've written about so beautifully in your book.
But exactly. It may be a subjective experience, but it's grounded in real science. If you look at nasal breathing and you look at using that oxygen most efficiently, you are allowing your body to operate in an aerobic state for longer than to go anaerobic and have that lactic acid build up and all of that. And this is very well known, having that balance, again, of CO2 and oxygen. And something that Patrick McEwen told me, which I really liked, he said, never work out harder than you can breathe correctly. So once you've reached that threshold and you're breathing, you're like, I really got to breathe through my mouth, or you're breathing in a dysfunctional way, you have to slow down and work yourself back up. And by slowly working yourself up this way, your performance is just going to shoot through the roof. And we've seen that time and time again. And again, these weren't studies that I was doing. These are studies that have been around for decades, that right now there's this new interest in breathing in athletics. And I have a feeling these people who are going to be adopting these healthy breathing habits are just going to show some incredible improvements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's again, it's just reflective of culture. It's the more now, we're quicker, faster. It's like, I'm going to work out, I want to push it hard. I'm going to be grunting. I'm going to be, you know, I wouldn't, is it a Western thing? I guess it is on some level. I really feel we're at that point now in Western culture where we have to go, look, we do so many things beautifully well, but we're kind of a bit lost on some of these other things, and maybe just slowing down and doing less. When we, you know, in inverted commas, work out or move our bodies, maybe use your nose as the barometer, and then, you know, you'll be working on your efficiency. Maybe you'll run less, but you'll run more efficiently, which actually will lead to you running more just a few months down the line.
Yeah, it still ties. There's nothing wrong with running further and running faster than a competitor, right? That's human nature to want to do that. But if you really want to do that, you have to take control of the systems in your body, and you have to be operating more efficiently. Why waste energy? Like, why not store that energy, then use it to best your competitor? That's what sports performance is all about. And something you mentioned that I thought was interesting is, in so many ways, like what we know about eating now, food. I remember in the 80s, growing up in the 80s, just the only things that were around the house were just like processed food. This was normal: white bread, Velveeta cheese, and everyone seemed to be eating this way. Well, we know that eating that stuff is bad news. I'd be hard pressed to find someone who is going to defend eating highly processed foods. It's bad news. It took us a while to get to this point, right? So it took about maybe 20 years of science to come out. Now we all know it. And I really think breathing is this next thing. So 20 years ago, even nowadays, some people are poo-pooing it, say how we breathe doesn't matter. The science is so clear. And you can go back in history thousands of years again, and they had been studying this for so long. And it really feels like this wave of awareness is really starting to crash right now.
No, I would agree, James. So just for the sort of final stage of this conversation then, we've just to sort of really put it in perspective, you know, we're setting the scene that people are breathing too much, they're breathing too fast. And it's not necessarily how, of course, breathing when you're working out and running, sure, work on it if you want to. But again, if you want to do a sprint, you want to breathe through your mouth to beat an opponent, that's okay. It's what we're talking about is how do you habitually breathe, right? So, you know, because I know there's some confusion. So just to clarify, so what you're saying, I think, and certainly what I would say is practice breathing through your nose. Practice for a few minutes a day, breathing less. Try and go for that 6 or even 8 breaths a minute. See how that feels. Now, if you want to go beyond that, if you want to go into super breathing territory, right? The cool stuff that people get, oh, you know what? I want to do a marathon up Everest like Wim Hof or, you know, which again appeals to us culture of doing more. And I want to do all that crazy stuff. There are quite a few different methods on there where we consciously overbreathe. So you were talking about under breathing. Now I want to talk about, you know, Wim Hof the breathing technique, or one of his breathing techniques, certainly the one that I've experienced when I saw him speak in LA a few years ago. And I recorded a podcast with him a few weeks back. It's not come out yet. And we actually did it where you actually, you know, for 30 or 40 breaths, you take these big breaths in and out, and then you do a hold. What is that doing? Why should people think about these over-breathing practices? Did you try them as part of your research? Did you look into the research here? And what would you tell people about these practices for those who are interested?
Sure. So the first thing, I just have to second something that you said. I'm talking about mouth breathing as a habit. Some people have written me and said, I noticed I was laughing today and I took a few mouth breaths. And again, I'm like, I thought I had made this very clear in the book. So I've been breathing through my mouth talking to you today, right? And when I swim in the ocean, I'm breathing through my mouth. When I'm laughing, I'm breathing through my mouth. This is perfectly fine and perfectly natural. So a few hundred breaths per day, breathing through the mouth, is fine. If we're taking 25,000, it's about that habit and that chronic breathing. You want to be breathing through your nose as often as you can, but that doesn't mean you should hate yourself for laughing or for breathing through your mouth. So I just want to make that really, really clear for everyone.
Or swimmers, right? Swimmers, like, you know, when you're swimming, you sort of have to take it. You don't have to, but you may gulp in a lot of water unless you breathe in through your mouth. So it can be normal for swimming. It can be fine, you know.
I swim and surf almost every day out here in San Francisco. And I tell you, I'm not breathing through my nose when I'm doing that. It's impossible. There's salt water up there. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
It's chronic, it's habit. So in the book, after like you get that foundation of healthy breathing that everyone can benefit from, I kept hearing about Wim Hof breathing, these intense pranayamas, holotropic breath work, these long breath holds. I said, this is completely counter to what I learned before. We shouldn't, like, apnea is a bad thing. Overbreathing's a bad thing. All of that is true when it's unconscious. But when you consciously do it, when you place yourself into a position in which you tell yourself to follow with this ancient breathing technique, and some of these include mouth breathing, exhaling through the mouth or even inhaling through the mouth, something amazing happens because you're allowing yourself to consciously take control of unconscious functions in your body. So with Wim specifically, what I thought was so interesting is we have this autonomic nervous system that turns us on for sympathetic stress or turns us off and relaxes us, parasympathetic. And we've been told if you pick up a textbook, it's going to say this is autonomic, as in automatic, as in beyond our conscious control. But we can control it through breathing. And when we control our nervous system function, we can take control of our immune system functions as well. And we've seen this, people who have been practicing Wim's version, which he calls it Wim Hof method, but he's very clear that this stuff has been around for at least 1,000 years. He didn't invent anything. He was able to take this thing and distribute it to the masses. And he's done that better than anyone on the planet for breathing awareness. But it's no coincidence that the people who practice this, people with autoimmune diseases, with arthritis, eczema, psoriasis, whatever, they can show a marked decrease in the symptoms of their problems. And sometimes they claim that they're completely healed by adopting these simple breathing habits, because what they're doing is they're breathing in a way that purposely stresses themselves out for a short amount of time so that they can spend the rest of the day relaxing and healing themselves. Again, seems a little counterintuitive. Why would I purposely want to stress myself out if I'm stressed out throughout the rest of the day? The point is to focus that and to regain a balance in your body and in your health. And that's exactly what these more intense over-breathing practices do.
I think what you said there about where this has come from, that nobody knew has invented anything, you know, Wim hasn't, these are all practices that have been there. But you also paid homage to Wim. He's got it out there to the masses in a fantastic way. You've said that, you know, that in the Indus Valley 5,000 years ago, there's writings on this and that. You actually, I think you wrote about that yoga or the research, the scriptures you saw showed yoga initially was just a breathing practice. I think
that's exactly true.
Is that true?
There were no standing poses. There was no movement. It was focusing, meditating, and breathing. Only in the last 100 years have we developed vinyasa flow. That wasn't around until 100 years ago. And I want to make this very clear to all the yogis out there. I do yoga all the time. Love it. I've seen the benefits. There's science proving the benefits. But this practice, this modern yoga that most of us do, is just that. It's modern. So the first yoga was a practice of breathing and focusing, and then it developed into holding one pose and breathing, opening up this side, inhaling into that lung, opening up the other side. And then about 100 years ago, 110 years ago, those poses were combined into this sort of dance-like movement, which had nothing to do with the early yoga. So it really was all based on breathing and focusing on the breath.
Yeah, amazing. And I think you quote someone in the book, I can't remember who it was, but someone said to you, there are as many breath practices as there are diets. I've never heard that before. I thought that was incredible, because we talked about conscious over breathing, and if we had more time, I would talk about two-mode breathing and holotropic breathing. But you know what? It's all there in your book for people to read about. But that is, who said that phrase? Who was it?
A freediver told me that very early on, which I thought was very surprising. I didn't know that there were different ways of breathing. This was years and years ago. But by adopting those different breathing practices, you can push your body into different states. You can relax yourself on purpose. You can stress yourself out on purpose, which has pronounced benefits to doing that as well. And again, you can find books. There's yoga books with 400 different breathing practices with all of these crazy names. All of that's great, but I wanted to focus on the general concept behind these. There are heavy breathing practices, over breathing. There's breath holding, there's slow breathing, and there's nasal breathing. And you can call it whatever you want. You can practice the Chinese version of that, the Greek version of that, the Indian version of that. Doesn't matter, because they're really all doing the same thing. To me, it's no coincidence that Wim Hof method, also known as Tumo, has so many of the same benefits of Sudarshan Kriya, which has been studied in 60 different independent studies to help people with anxiety, depression, autoimmune problems. There's no coincidence that these things are helping people in the same way, because guess what? They have you breathe really intensely and then breathe really slowly. It's almost the exact same practice, just coming in from different directions.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, you mentioned freediving, and I know you wrote a book on that. I haven't read it yet, and I am definitely, it's on right at the top of my list to sort of read when I get some time. But one question I had about freedivers who obviously have masterful control of their breath. Did you notice, was there a theme that, a freediver by definition needs to have a very high level of control over their breath, a high degree of carbon dioxide tolerance, so they can actually go down and actually maintain that, tolerate the buildup of carbon dioxide in their body without having that strong urge to breathe. Given the multiple benefits of improving your breathing, have you heard any stories in freedivers that actually a lot of them had mental health problems or depression or anxiety or autoimmune conditions that got better? Or the flip side is, was it those conditions that actually led them to freediving in the first place? I don't know, it's so interesting for me, that.
Many of them had anxiety issues, sometimes depression issues, sometimes addiction issues. There's a great film that somebody made, a very short film, Jonathan Rempel, about a freediver who had all of those things. And she found freediving because when you freedive, you are it is almost like a forced meditation. You cannot freedive stressed out. You cannot freedive with anxiety. You cannot freedive with a sense of panic. You have to completely give yourself over to the water and connect so deeply in your body. And when you're down there, everything is silent. So you are so connected with your breath and with your brain on such an intimate level. And this reconnects people with themselves when they're up on dry land afterwards. So some people have found that salvation through freediving, and so much of that is due to breath control. So I've never seen, I've met dozens and dozens of freedivers. That book, Deep, looked at the ocean from the surface to the very bottom of the sea, looking at the human connection. So towards the surface, there was a lot of freediving, but I've never seen one who suffered from anxiety. I've never seen one who panicked, because you just can't do that when you're down deep in the water holding your breath. There hasn't been any studies on this. I think it would be fascinating to look at the physiology of someone before and after training for freediving, look at markers of panic, look at other issues, even blood glucose, and how they react. Because freediving is the ultimate art of breathing. You are focused on your breath, connected to your breath the whole time.
It's breath, it's mindfulness, it's meditation, it's everything all in one, right? To be able to do that practice. And one study that we've not had a chance to talk about, which I've underlined heavily in my book, and I'd encourage people to read it in the book, is it's just this idea of fear. And that lady who had that genetic condition without the amygdala, this sort of emotional center, the fear center of the brain, and how basically you can't stress her out. She would get scared of nothing until carbon dioxide went into it. She got a dose of carbon dioxide, and that then stressed her out and scared her. I won't sort of spoil the rest of the story there for people, but what's really incredible for that, and I really want people to get this, is that we think fear and anxiety is always about an external event. Oh, that is happening to us. We forget that it can be biology, it can be physiology. And I know how many people suffer from these sort of conditions, and I really, really want to encourage them that what James has been talking about, read the book, learn about these techniques, and start small, because it can really transform every aspect of your life. James, look, I don't say this often, but that is a phenomenal book. I feel quite lucky, actually. I've got these early copies, they're still very sort of the early unproofed manuscripts. So I feel I've got sort of something quite special here. The podcast is called Feel Better, Live More, because, James, it's pretty obvious, but fundamentally, I've seen time and time again where people feel better in themselves to get more out of their lives. And I think it's pretty clear that you're making the case that if we breathe better, we're going to live more. So I wonder if, I want people to get inspired by this. I want them to get your book, but I want people to take action. I don't want them just to hear it and go, that was interesting, and then get on with their lives. So I always like to leave the podcast with my guests with some sort of practical advice. I know you've covered a lot of it already, but just some sort of, what would you say? If someone's heard this and they're still skeptical, how would you encourage them to get going with a breathwork practice in their daily lives?
I would say go see for yourself, because you're your best judge of this. If you have a blood pressure monitor, and a lot of people do, take your blood pressure before and after a simple breathing practice 6 times a minute. You could start with that. Start small, exactly as you had said, and give it a while. By that, give it a week. So adopt a simple practice. And again, this isn't requiring you to go to a monastery or sit in a dark corner. You can adopt healthy breathing practices anywhere. And we know that there's a solid foundation of science between all of these things. We have seen people absolutely transform by adopting simple breathing habits. This is not a placebo effect. It's absolutely real. And I'm convinced, I've experienced this myself. I've talked to dozens and dozens of people who have also experienced it. I've talked to the leaders in the field who have introduced me to all of their data. And I find that this is an underappreciated and underacknowledged aspect of our health, but that's starting to change, and it couldn't happen sooner, especially right now in the midst of a pandemic. Focusing on your breathing can really have some transformative effects.
Oxygen is the most important molecule we've got, right? It's like in terms of for energy, right? Maybe it's not the most important. It's the thing that's allowing us to exist, right, in the manner that we are. 500 million years ago, multicellular organisms figured out how to use oxygen for fuel, and thus aerobic metabolism began. The evolution has continued for that long, right? So going on that timeline and seeing that, we have not turned back from the most efficient way to produce energy, which is aerobically and bringing oxygen into the system. And that's what the design of the inhale of our lungs does, is it brings oxygen in the system. The only way to make that oxygen available, though, is another thing, another gas, right? That's carbon dioxide. And so the carbon dioxide is a response to a hostile environment, I guess you could call it. And that's what this planet was right before multicellular organisms figured out everything, right? And then a little algae figured out how to convert sunlight into energy and convert the sunlight and the byproduct of that became oxygen, right? And so the planet got engulfed in algae, and this is a gross basic overview of some serious stuff that people have done real work on, right? But that's toxic environment left for anaerobic metabolism, primarily in single cell organisms, to work. Now, not all single cell organisms will function off of anaerobic metabolism, but it is a default system that we use. And they work congruently in our system, right? So when I don't have enough oxygen present, right, being used, my body will it instantly, beautifully starts to switch over to this anaerobic system. So if there's not enough oxygen present in something, we default to another energy system, and that would be the anaerobic system, right? And so using more sugar and glucose for energy, because the brain and the nervous system actually require glucose as its only source of fuel, right? And this is 20% of the energy we use, right? So as I inhale, I draw oxygen in, it enters the bloodstream, it goes to the bloodstream, then the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell, the organelles of the cells, go to work and use the oxygen. The only way for that oxygen to come off the red blood cell through blood is by carbon dioxide replacing that molecule in the red blood cell. And so I need to have enough carbon dioxide present in order to make the environment, let's call it perfect, for oxygen to work. Now, we're doing this in a very regulated way all day long, 26,000 breaths, right? You're using oxygen predominantly, but how much are we using that oxygen? And that starts to show up in things like, if we look at respiration rate, well, like the Buteyko method, I think the Buteyko folks believe, and this is a method that was designed by Konstantin Buteyko out of Russia, the former Soviet Union, that 80% of the population roughly chronically hyperventilates, which means they're overbreathing. And so when I overbreathe, when I breathe, have a high respiration rate, I'm actually blowing off or getting rid of more carbon dioxide than probably necessary. So hyperventilation becomes a stress reaction, right? A higher stress reaction, I breathe more. Think of working out. You start running, your respiration rate, you start to breathe more frequently, right?
Yeah.
Stress is the same thing. If I'm sitting here and you're stressing me out in any way, shape, or form, my respiration rate will tend to follow if I am stressed out, unless I'm actually aware of this. This is where consciousness and awareness have a game or a play, right? So where I can take volitional control over my breathing and manage that, or train that in a way to bring me back to a place to where I'm actually using that oxygen. And this is also known as the Bohr effect to a large degree, is having enough acid in the environment in order for the oxygen to be used. And so that's why breath control becomes such a big player in things, is I can actually optimize myself to use more oxygen.
Yeah, I mean, super incredible. And, in the morning of your Arts and Breath Clinic course, I don't know what you call it, yesterday, it was really great to understand that of course we need oxygen. We know we need oxygen, but actually, in order for that oxygen to come off and do the magic that we want it to do in our body, we need enough CO2, carbon dioxide, but we have become a carbon dioxide intolerant society.
Yes.
80% of us potentially are over breathing, which means we're blowing off too much carbon dioxide. So yes, the breathing is, we want oxygen, but without enough carbon dioxide, we can't use it.
Yeah.
And I say when I talk to people, and it's how I wrote about breathing in the stress solution, was about breathing is information. Breathing is information for your body. The way you breathe will give your brain information. Are you in danger or are you safe? And I say to some people, look, when you are on deadlines and you have 10 emails to get back to you and a few projects to finish, you are probably changing your breathing without realizing it. You are probably breathing more from your chest and your diaphragm. You're probably speeding up your rate. And that is sending information to your brain. That is, again, is like a vicious cycle. And I love that test you guys do with your students, the CO2 tolerance test.
Yeah.
Which I found super, super interesting. So I wonder if you just unpack that for, maybe laymen who might be listening to this. What does it mean to be CO2 intolerant or carbon dioxide intolerant? Yeah.
So we're currently working on defining this. And a lot of the work Rob does, who is my partner in this with the Art of Breath, and who's my counterpart in what we do, has come up with a term that I think is probably going to take off. And that is what this is: psychometabolic reactivity. And so
snappy.
Yeah, isn't it?
I love it.
But
I do actually.
Yeah. Well, I look at this as how well we're willing to optimize this. So psychometabolic optimization and how you react to what is the metabolic waste product of energy. That is CO2. So it comes down to our relationship to CO2. And so we'll take this to when you were swimming and you went into that panic attack and, not seeing the bottom of the floor of the ocean anymore. And you went into an override. I can guarantee you, based on our work, now we'd have to prove this, but we're currently have plenty of research starting to show this, that your CO2 tolerance hit the floor when that happened, meaning there was elevated levels of CO2 and you started to react to that because of the context of the story and what was going on.
Hold on. So let's go through that. So I was swimming.
Yeah.
Okay. No problem.
Higher levels of CO2 because of work.
Okay. So I was working and therefore I'm starting to build up carbon dioxide in my blood.
That's why your respiration rate went up.
So everything goes up to, and this presumably will happen if someone's running or anything that they're doing.
Yes, correct.
So, but then I hit a point where I got scared.
Yep.
So I've already got raised levels of CO2. So I'm hyperventilating I'm assuming to get rid of that CO2.
You got it. You literally, so the only time that you don't react to anything with your breath is when you're dead. Your brainstem is online. It's a part of everything you're going to do. So you're going to react in any instance to your environment, to what your perception is. Hearing, smelling, seeing, taste, touch, right? So your five senses are here by design to help with all of this and signal even to that respiration pattern, what I need to do based on how I need to optimize myself, self-regulate, right? Well, my thinking's off. So self-regulation right now, I'm responding to the CO2 that's in my blood. Now, it didn't need to be that high. Your CO2 did not need to be that high. You could have dropped that with, if you're let's say you hate flying. Like I'm not a big fan of flying. I've gotten good at it, right? Because I've done work at it, right? Control your breathing while you're doing it so that when things start to shake or start to do things and you think the plane's going to go down or whatever, that's just a story. That's really just a story. And so it's the context. And so now I'm responding through the limit, these emotions that are happening through this story, right? And my respiration center responds to that. So controlling my breathing allows me to manage the carbon dioxide. And what happens in a panic situation? What's one of the things we do for people when they're freaking out? And
brown paper bag.
Bingo. Brown paper bag on the face, breathe into it.
So what's
Why?
going on there?
CO2 is you're rebreathing. You're actually using more of the oxygen that you've got. Right?
So just unpack that for people listening to this. You're having a panic attack, you're over breathing.
Yeah.
So you're blowing off a lot of carbon dioxide.
Yeah. So remember what I said about how we default into, so we have an aerobic system or we default into anaerobic. Yeah. What happens when we don't have enough carbon dioxide in the environment?
We're not able to utilize any oxygen that we have. We're not able to get that
What does
off.
the brain need to function?
Oxygen.
Ba-doom.
So suddenly we don't have enough oxygen. So what is the brown paper bag doing?
It's recirculating the carbon dioxide that you're rebreathing. It's basically a rebreather.
So you're putting more carbon dioxide back in.
You couldn't breathe into this bag for 5 minutes. You know, it's just a few breaths, right? But you're rebreathing and you're basically tricking the brain.
Yeah.
And Dr. Justin Feinstein out of Oklahoma is doing work on bolus hits right now of carbon dioxide with super high anxiety patients.
Yeah.
And having insane results, like people getting one hit and just like this freak out mode thing happens. But because it doesn't happen in these successive breaths, that people regulate and the brain and you calm down and you're like, oh, this isn't as bad as I think it is. And I'm able to control this.
So if I was trained, had I been trained at that point in breathing and done a bit of practice and been in the ocean before, in theory, are you saying that I could have switched off that hyperactive stress response that was going on in my body? I could have actually switched it off, maintained control, maintained calm, and carried on swimming.
That is where choice enters the situation and choice of breath. I choose to breathe and control my breathing right now. Now I need to choose and change my narrative because I'm now exacerbating a situation that is counter to what I want to be going on. I'm freaking out. There's no need for me to freak out. I am not in imminent death. And if I am freaking out, then get the fuck out of there, or excuse me, but get out of there.
Yeah.
Like, right? If it's truly a freak out, or if you want to participate in this and change how your brain works, plasticity, lay back on your back and control your breathing until you can calm it down.
Yeah. If
you're in the water and you're in a wetsuit, you're going to float. Yeah. Trust me, you're not going to sink. Yeah. There's a reason why freedivers need a weight belt to go down, right? Yeah. Like, so
even that. So I've sort of tried to dissect what happened, and I think for me, there's so many reasons why I freaked out. One, I never wore a wetsuit before. I didn't even know.
You absolutely broke every rule of like going into a competition for the first time or doing something.
Yeah,
right?
I never worn a wetsuit before. I didn't trust the guy the guy next to me said, "Look, Rangan, just lie on your back and you'll float." I thought, there is no way I'm lying on my back at the moment. I am going to sink. So I didn't know that. The water was cold. And if we have time, we can maybe explore what that cold does to people. And yeah, sure, I hadn't been in the ocean before. So all these factors together, it's like almost like a perfect storm. Like I would probably have had to do a lot of training to...
But the fact that you unpack it like that, like you're able to do that, like, look, so what does this mean for Rangan? What does this mean? Like, oh, I tend to put things, like jump onto things and do everything okay, maybe I should start dissecting that a little bit further back in my life, when that started, how that started, why that started, and for Brian, especially like, I think it really comes down to a lot of the relationships and things that we've done. And so I look at like my childhood and it was like, I was rebellious, man. I got attention. I got love because I rebelled. Like, I got attention when I was rebellious. Hence, look at me. Like when I've got my shirt off and I'm in short sleeves, I'm covered in tattoos. I grew up in an environment that was very rebellious. I looked up to people that were punk rock. It was like this whole thing and it garnered me attention. So I felt love that way. So that then transcended into aggression and what that meant. And this is my default for survival. Like, so I tend to overdo things, right? And be, I'm going to do this. I'm responsible for everything, or like it just.
And we think that's our personality.
It's not who we are.
Exactly. And I sort of, Gabor Mate, I spoke to him a few months ago. Do you know Gabor's work?
I do.
Yeah. I love Gabor's work. I think he talks with such compassion.
What's it, Telling Ghosts? Or
Hungry Ghosts.
Hungry Ghosts, yeah.
Yeah, and
I read
one of the funnest conversations I've had on the show for sure. And he talks about how we use language and how that determines a lot of the way we think we are, and what we think is our personality. But we could go down a big rabbit hole right here if we want to. I'm going to pull us back to the breath, because I'm keen that people listen to this who think, okay, look, I get it, guys, I get it. Breathing's important. Somebody listens to this who has not a clue how to start.
Yeah,
right.
I got a simple solution for that.
Well, let's dive right in.
Well, we all have apps on our phones. We designed an actual app based off the work we've done, and what we saw was that not everybody responds to the same patterns in the same ways, because our physiology and thinking and emotions aren't always in the same place, right? Like, you deal with things very differently than I deal with things. That would make sense, right? Like, if we were training for the same event, we could follow the same training program, but we're probably not going to get the same results, because you've got asymmetries I don't. Your physiology is starting off in a place mine isn't, right? Like, all of these things are variant, right? So we saw pretty early on that people responded very differently. So we learned how to put what patterns work with kind of specific ways of dealing with things emotionally, right? And so we based this algorithm off of how people emotionally handle stress and their CO2 tolerance test. And so it starts people off, and it gives them the state app. Starts off by taking people through this test, and it gives you 4 exercises to do. And there's one for feeling alert, which is waking up in the morning. There's one for being present, which is maybe throughout the day. There's one for feeling calm, which is whenever you need to feel like you're calm. And then there's one for which most of us are dealing with, is to help you fall asleep, to downshift you big time. So there's 2 on the end that are kind of really important about downshifting, and something we need to take more into account in our lives, because that's the thing we're not doing. Is it's not that like stress isn't the problem. We need to lean into stress. We need to understand that it's what we're doing between stressors. Like, so we're going to have had this conversation for, 90 minutes or 2 hours. Right. And it's like, when I get out of here, I'm going to get in the car, and I'm going to do I'll probably do a few breathing exercises as I do, because I'll just come down a little bit, and then I can hop back on a phone call and do things again. And, regulate. I can process what we did, and then I can move on to the next thing. And that's the thing we're not doing, is we're not processing these things. We're not actually going through the process. We're just jumping from one exposure to the next. And so that's what the app is really designed to do. And it's like, hey, here's 4 exercises you can do that are actually customized to you. So your app is very different from my app, and very different from Rob's app. And it changes and evolves with you based on how you respond to carbon dioxide. Because when you can actually get better at these patterns, you're increasing your tolerance to CO2, which only means you're creating more room and the ability to shift down or up in an instant.
On the whole point of CO2 tolerance.
Yep.
In that incident, when I was in the water, when I was panicking.
Yeah.
You said that actually my CO tolerance changed, or I was at that point intolerant to CO2, so I'm breathing fast to blow it off. Is that an acute thing that happens? Or had I been training my breathing consistently, and I had raised my tolerance to CO2 on a consistent basis, would I not have felt that intolerant to it in that incident, in that particular moment? Does that make sense?
At that particular moment, most likely, maybe a little bit further down the swim, you may have, because it may have required more work or more storytelling, negative thinking in order to exacerbate it, right? What we're doing is pushing that envelope, like we're building that gap of choice, right? Like that, you got stimulus and response. You're building a bigger area for just going, I'm cool. I know if I continue to push this a little bit harder, I've got a problem. But here's the thing: is you are combining emotions with work, right? And it's not that we're not doing this when we're training or working out, but we're not doing it in that context where I'm exposing myself to an environment. But the thing is it should be an acute response. It should be. It should not be chronic. And this is where we start to see long-term, like chronic stuff, like being emotional and not dealing with the stuff that we should be dealing with, like at the heart of it, when we, like victimizing ourselves, this inevitably does not deal with things like I'm not at fault. I don't have any play in this. Well, if you're thinking about it, you've got plenty of play in it. I hate to break it to you. All right. So understanding that there is that thing there, your having stress to emotion will hold on to a lower so it'll affect your CO2 tolerance more than physically affecting. Remember how we did the test after we worked out and your CO2 tolerance test plummeted? Then we did the breathing exercises and it should have gone up. Yeah. And we saw a lot of people in that room where for the fourth CO2 tolerance of the day, granted, the first two were done when we weren't even working, right? We weren't even really doing any real work. The fourth one, after you'd done 2 workouts, was the best for a lot of people in that room, right? And that's the power of what breath can do, is it can change that CO2, and people felt calmer. The whole room looked like it was just docile after we did that.
It was so amazing that those sort of 5-10 minutes at the end where everyone had just done this down-regulating breathing pattern, you could just feel the energy. It was just chill. Yeah. It just felt calm, and it was amazing. And
4 minutes of breathing. That was it. 4 minutes of breathing.
And 4. I just thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to feel this way at one point in the day, at least every single day? But with that, you absolutely can. You mentioned the breathing practices make that space in between stimulus and response bigger. Mm-hmm. Is there anything in life that is more important, that is going to have more impact on your well-being, on the well-being of people around you, than actually making that space big?
I don't know if there would be anything else.
I don't think there could be, because that is what gets us into trouble in our life, whether we make poor choices, whether we fall out with our wife or our husband, or we shout at our kids.
And even this is not new. This is old thinking. I mean, look, Bruce Lee literally conceptualized and brought the idea of self-actualization. That is that. If you don't build that gap of actualization, you're just a reactive species in an environment that is chaotic.
And you give your power to other people. You
100%. I know way too many people that are running around pretending to be happy, thinking happiness is the key to everything, and happiness is, in my opinion, is not. It's contentment. You got to understand, and this is my buddy Fergus Connolly and I talk about this all the time. And this is the big problem with what we're doing right now, is everybody's chasing happiness. Yeah. Fuck happiness. Like, they're going to have times where things are tough, but you should have the tools to understand that gap, and that, hey, you know what? This too shall pass. Like this, I have the tools in order to manage this stressful situation. Like, I'm going through something with my wife that I've got to have the tools. Like, I'm in an argument and it got bad and bad and bad. And I'm just, this is like just making this up, but it's like, hey, I've seen this with people all over the place. And it's like, does this need to be this bad? No, it doesn't. It does not. And if you actually reflect on yourself and use breathing to actually control that response to what's going on, that psychometabolic reactivity becomes optimized. And you start to actually work through, hey, this isn't, rebellious Brian is just an identity. Yeah. Bingo. That is not me. That was just who I thought I was. I am actually much more than that. And I have the ability to choose how I am. I'm not anywhere near the rebellious person I was. Now, there's aspects of me that's pretty rebellious, going and getting out of a cage with sharks and, but those are experiences, and these are things that I want to be able to go and do and that's what living is. That's life.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy one that I had with Esther Perel, all about relationships. It's right there, so give it a click and let me know what you think.
This notion sometimes that people have that you have to know yourself first, you have to love yourself first, and then you can go and be in a relationship, never made sense to me. Because